Hey everyone, tonight we drift back to a world gilded by myth, ancient Greece, a civilization painted in sunlit marble and poetic fire. It's the cradle of democracy, the birthplace of drama, and home to statues that seem carved from divine perfection, though notably not from trousers. But peel back the glory and you'll find a reality far less polished. Because while Greece gave us philosophy and the Parthenon, it also gave its average citizen a life so grueling you'd likely tap out before lunch. So if you're still with me, feel free to like this video, but only if it resonates. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love seeing who's awake with me across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe light a candle, and let's step quietly into the past. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your day doesn't start with an alarm, but with the sun turning your home into a kiln. Your house is small, mud brick walls, a thatched or tiled roof, and windows so narrow they're more like slits. No glass, no insulation, no ventilation. In summer, the heat soaks in like a sponge, radiating back at you by mid-morning. In winter, the same walls turn icy and you're bundled in a thin woolen cloak, praying the fire doesn't die. You sleep on a mat stuffed with straw, maybe a wooden plank if you're feeling fancy. No pillow, just a rolled-up tunic or your arm, and if you're lucky, the bed bugs didn't keep you up all night. But let's be real, they probably did. There's no running water, so your morning begins with a walk to a public fountain if you're in the city, or a well if you're in the countryside. You balance a clay amphora on your shoulder, careful not to slip on the uneven stone paths. One misstep and you've just wasted hours of labor. Cleaning? That's not a morning ritual. You might splash water on your face, but full washing is saved for the evening if you've earned the energy. Instead, you rub olive oil onto your skin, not for softness, but as a cleanser. Then you scrape it off with a strigil, a curved metal tool. Think of it as ancient dry cleaning, except you're coated in oil, scraping yourself in public, and the result is still sticky. Privacy, that's a myth. Your entire family shares one or two rooms. You sleep, eat, and argue in the same space. The streets outside aren't just roads, they're open sewers, marketplaces, and communal living rooms. You haven't even eaten, and already you're sweating, your tunic clinging in places it really shouldn't. And this is the easiest part of your day. So, breakfast, or what passes for it. You're handed a flat cake of barley, hard, flavorless, and baked on hot stones or in the ashes of last night's fire. It's called maza, and it's less a meal, more a survival tactic. You might dip it in weak wine, not for pleasure, but because the water's unsafe. There's no filtration, no boiling, no chlorine, so instead, everyone drinks kaikian, water mixed with wine to kill the bacteria. If you're wealthy, you might get a few olives, a dried fig, or a smear of goat cheese. But let's be honest, you're not. You're just hoping your bread isn't crawling with weevils. There's no sitting down to eat, no chairs, no utensils, no slow chewing. You eat fast, standing or squatting, then get back to work. And if you're a woman, you likely eat after the men, if anything's left. In many homes, women and children are served last, if at all. So not only is the food grim, but you're expected to be grateful for the scraps. The irony? The Greeks invented the symposium, lavish wine-fueled gatherings with poetry, music, and intellectual debate. But breakfast? That's not worth a single line of verse. It's fuel, not feast. So chew it like a soldier and try not to crack a tooth. Now time to freshen up. Except hygiene here isn't about cleanliness, it's about ritual, oil, and damage control. Most people don't bathe daily. Instead, they pour water from a jug over their bodies at a courtyard basin or public fountain. Bathhouses exist, but they're rare and mostly for the elite, and there's no soap. That's centuries away. No shampoo, no loofah, no minty freshness. So you do what every Greek does, coat your skin in olive oil, then scrape it off with a strigil. It's like bathing in salad dressing and then shaving it away. And yes, everyone does this, often in public, often naked, often loudly. Teeth, forget brushing. There's no toothpaste, no bristles. Some chew on a frayed twig. Others rub their gums with crushed charcoal or rinse with vinegar. Dental care is less routine, more prayer. Bad breath is universal. Deodorant doesn't exist, but perfume does for those who can afford myrrh or rose oil. So you dab a bit on before walking miles in leather sandals under a sun that feels national. The result? A unique blend of sweat, dust, and desperation. Laundry, rare. Clothes are washed by beating them against rocks in a river. If you're poor, your tunic hasn't seen water since the last festival. So hygiene here isn't about looking good. It's about appearing slightly less wretched than yesterday. And even then, the heat wins. Now let's talk wardrobe. Your options, a chiton or a himation. Both just large rectangles of linen or wool, draped and pinned. No tailoring, no pockets, no elastic, and definitely no underwear. It's not a fashion choice. It's just not a thing. One strong breeze and your dignity is at the mercy of Aeolus. Footwear, if you're lucky, sandals. If not, bare feet on sun-scorched stone, animal droppings and market slime. Imagine walking across a hot grill in July, dodging donkey dung. That's your daily commute. No hats, no sunscreen, no UV protection. You're in 450 BCE, not a beach resort. The Aegean sun doesn't care if you're Socrates or a fishmonger, it will burn you. By noon, your shoulders are raw, your feet are filthy, and your robe is glued to your skin in geometrically impossible ways. And yes, public nudity isn't taboo. You might pass men exercising naked at the gymnasium, or even politicians speaking in togas that barely stay on. If you're rich, your clothes might be dyed purple, saffron, crimson, but dyes are expensive. Most people wear undyed wool or linen, the color of dust. So you walk through your day looking like a walking burrito, sunburned, sweating, praying your brooch doesn't snap in front of the priest. And the worst part, you've only just begun. Now, if you're a free male citizen, it's time for your civic duty, military service. In Athens or Sparta, you don't choose to be a soldier. You are one from adolescence onward. By your teens, you're training with wooden swords, learning the phalanx, that tight formation where you stand shoulder to shoulder, shield locked, hoping the guy next to you doesn't flinch. In Sparta, boys enter the agog at 7, a brutal system of endurance, starvation, and combat training designed to forge unbreakable warriors. In Athens, it's less extreme but still mandatory, 2 years of active duty, then decades of reserve service. You can't say, I prefer books. Even Plato served in the military. And there's always a war. Sparta versus Athens, Athens versus Persia, city versus city. Peace is just the pause between battles. Armor? If you can afford it, you buy your own. Helmet, breastplate, greaves, shield, spear. This isn't a state-supplied army. It's a DIY defense force. If you're poor, you fight as a light infantryman, which is Greek for more likely to die. When you're not fighting, you're training, rowing triremes or debating strategy in the assembly. There's no veterans care, no therapy, no pension. Just scars, memories, and maybe a modest grave marker. If you think this sounds harsh, wait until you hear about life as a woman. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, women had fewer rights than a household slave. You couldn't vote, own land, or appear in public without a male guardian. If you were seen too often outside, people might assume you were a courtesan, or worse, a Spartan. Your day starts before dawn, spinning wool, grinding grain, baking bread, fetching water, raising children. You're the household manager, but with no pay, no recognition, and no days off. You don't attend plays, join debates, or go to the gymnasium, but that's for men and usually naked. You're confined to the gynaekeon, the women's quarters, with only glimpses through latticed windows to the outside world. Education, if you're lucky, basic literacy, but your training is in domestic skills, not philosophy, math, or rhetoric. That's for boys. Your purpose? Marry young, often at 13 or 14, to a man twice your age chosen by your father. Love is optional. The dowry is not. Your worth is tied to your womb. In Sparta, women had more freedom. They could own property, exercise publicly, and receive education. But their liberation came at a cost. They were expected to produce strong warriors, and their lives were still dictated by the state. So while the Greeks worshipped goddesses like Athena and Artemis, real women were expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible. Now let's talk democracy. Because yes, Athens invented it, but let's be clear, it wasn't for everyone. To vote in the ecclesia, you had to be a free adult male citizen born to Athenian parents. That excluded women, slaves, foreigners, medics, and children, about 90% of the population. So it wasn't government of the people, it was government of a small club of sunburned men. If you qualified, though, you didn't just vote, you participated. Laws were debated in massive assemblies. There were no career politicians. Every citizen could speak, vote, or be randomly selected for office via lottery. Your shoemaker might run the Navy one day. Your neighbor who thinks earthquakes are caused by angry gods might judge a murder trial the next. And if someone got too powerful, ostracism. Once a year, citizens wrote a name on a shard of pottery, an ostracon, and voted to exile them for 10 years. No trial, no defense, just, you're too popular, leave. And yet, despite its flaws, Athenian democracy was revolutionary. It gave ordinary men a voice, well, some of them, and laid the foundation for modern governance. But make no mistake, it wasn't inclusive. Women, slaves, foreigners, all silenced. Philosophers who asked too many questions, sometimes executed. Democracy was born here, but if you showed up expecting equality, you'd be handed your own ostracon and told to leave. And speaking of slavery, it wasn't just common, it was foundational. Even modest households had at least one slave. They came from war captives, conquered regions, or debt bondage. Thracians, Syrians, even other Greeks. Slaves cooked, cleaned, taught, and managed businesses. In the silver mines of Laurion, they labored in darkness, inhaling toxic dust, dying slowly so Athens could mint coins. Some were educated, scribes, tutors, accountants, but they were still property. They could be beaten, sold, or killed. A few earned freedom, but never citizenship. And philosophers like Aristotle defended slavery as natural. So yes, Greece gave us ethics and justice, but it built them on the backs of the voiceless. Now, feeling sick? Too bad. There are no hospitals. If you're ill, you stay home. Maybe a neighbor knows a herbal remedy. Maybe you pray to Asclepius, the god of healing. Maybe you visit a temple and sleep there, hoping for a healing dream. Greek medicine believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, Illness meant imbalance. Fever, too much blood, time for bloodletting. Cough, too much phlegm, try fasting. Depression, that's black bile, maybe take a walk by the sea. Treatments included garlic, figs, poppy seeds, and vinegar compresses. Surgery, rare, painful, and risky. No anesthesia, no antiseptics. Childbirth, extremely dangerous. Mortality rates for mothers and infants were high. Wealthy, maybe a traveling doctor. Poor, you relied on resilience or didn't survive, but there was theater, and it was intense. Citizens could attend for free if you were a male citizen. You'd sit in a hillside amphitheater for hours. No breaks, no snacks, no toilets. The Dionysia festival lasted all day with tragedies, comedies, satyr plays. Tragedies were brutal. Family curses, divine wrath, generational doom. Comedies were savage, mocking politicians, philosophers, even bodily functions. Actors wore masks, padded costumes, and exaggerated voices, all male, even for female roles. The chorus chanted like a live Twitter feed. The audience was loud, booing, cheering, throwing olives. Theater wasn't passive. It was democratic, emotional, and participatory. And then there was philosophy, not in classrooms, but in the agora. Socrates didn't write books. He asked questions. He'd stop you buying olives and ask, "What is justice?" then debate you for hours until you questioned your entire worldview. Plato and Aristotle followed, shaping ideas that still echo. But philosophy wasn't academic. It was confrontational, exhausting, and often humiliating. You didn't just watch, you got pulled in. Say one wrong thing, and you became the day's example of an unexamined life. And if you became too popular, ostracism. Even heroes like Aristides with the just were exiled because people were tired of hearing how virtuous he was. Themistocles, who saved Athens at Salamis, was later voted out. Success had a price, so ambition meant walking a tightrope. Respected, but not too respected. Life expectancy, around 30, 35. 1 in 3 children died young. You could die from a cut, a fever, childbirth, or bad water. Disease spread fast in crowded cities. The plague of Athens killed a third of the population. War, constant, and the gods, not kind. They were jealous, petty, and quick to punish. Forget a sacrifice, crop failure, mock a statue, lightning strike. You lived in constant spiritual anxiety, praying, offering, hoping not to offend. So, would you last a day in ancient Greece? Honestly? No. You'd collapse by noon. The heat, the labor, the lack of basic comforts, it would shatter the fantasy. You miss your shower, your coffee, your right to complain. The philosophers, the art, the temples, that was the 1%. For most, it was hard labor, inequality, and early death. And yet they endured. They built, wrote, questioned, and created, not because life was easy, but because they found meaning in the struggle. They shaped the world with bare hands under a brutal sun. You wouldn't last, but they did, and if by some miracle you adapted, if you endured, they wouldn't mock you. They'd hand you a chiton, point to the Acropolis, and say, "Good, now carry that up the hill." Boudica, the storm that shook an empire. They called her a barbarian. The Romans, draped in their purple togas, writing history with a sharpened stylus, they called her a savage. But they whispered her name in fear, because she was not just a queen, she was a reckoning. This is the story of Boudica, a woman who lost everything, then took it all back with fire. It began not with war, but with betrayal. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, had spent his life walking the tightrope between survival and sovereignty. A client king under Rome's shadow, He believed loyalty would protect his people. In his will, he left half his kingdom to the Roman Emperor Nero, the other to his 2 young daughters. A gesture of peace, a plea for continuity. Rome did not honor wills, Rome honored power. The moment Prasutagus died, Roman officials declared the entire kingdom forfeit. Soldiers marched in, seized land, livestock, and treasure. But theft of property was not enough. To break a people, you break their dignity. So they dragged Boudica into the public square. They stripped her, bound her, and whipped her, not just to punish, but to humiliate, to erase her authority. And before her eyes they violated her daughters. This was not conquest. This was terror, a message carved in blood. You are nothing, but Rome made a fatal error. They mistook pain for weakness. They thought they were crushing a queen. Instead, they forged a storm. Word spread across Britannia like wildfire. Among the Trinovantes, whose lands had been stolen, whose temples defiled. Among the Catuvellauni, whose ancestors had once ruled these hills. The outrage was not just Boudica's, it was theirs. A shared wound, a collective fury. She did not speak as a diplomat. She spoke as a mother who had nothing left to lose. Is it for this, she asked, that we endure the lash, that our daughters are defiled, that our gods are mocked? Her voice, described by Roman historians as deep and commanding, cut through the silence. I am not fighting for my kingdom. I am fighting for our freedom. And they answered. From the forests of East Anglia to the hills of the Midlands, warriors came. Farmers laid down their plows. Hunters traded bows for spears. Women took up axes. They came not for gold, but for vengeance, for dignity, for the right to die on their feet. Boudica did not command from behind. She stood at the front, tall, red-haired, eyes blazing. She rode in a war chariot, her daughters beside her, a spear raised to the sky. She invoked Andraste, the warrior goddess of the Britons, and swore an oath. Rome will pay in blood. Her army swelled to 100,000. Some say more. Untrained, yes, undisciplined, perhaps, but burning with a fire no Roman legion could understand. And then, the first strike. Camulodunum, once a tribal stronghold, now a Roman colony, a monument to occupation. At its heart stood the temple of Claudius, built with forced labor, a marble insult to the conquered. To the Britons, it was not sacred, it was a blasphemy. Boudica gave the order. There was no siege, no negotiation. The city fell in days. The Roman veterans who had bullied the locals were slaughtered. The temple was burned to the ground. Survivors spoke of rivers of blood, of bodies piled in the streets. Archaeologists today still find a thick layer of ash beneath modern Colchester, a scar in the earth 2,000 years old. Rome had not seen this before, not from a woman, not from a people they had dismissed as primitive. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, fighting rebels in Wales, received the news too late. By the time he turned, Camulodunum was already smoke and silence, but Boudica was not done. Her next target, Londinium. Founded just years before, it was Rome's jewel in Britannia, a bustling port, a hub of trade, a symbol of imperial reach. But when Suetonius arrived, he saw the truth. No walls, no garrison, no chance. He made a cold decision: abandon the city. He pulled out the soldiers, the wealthy, those who could run. He left behind the old, the sick, the defiant, and then she came. Londinium burned, not looted, not occupied, erased. Homes, markets, temples, all reduced to ash. Men, women, children, slaughtered without mercy. Some were crucified, others burned alive in their homes. Roman sources claim 70,000 died in Londinium and Verulamium alone. Whether exaggerated or not, the message was clear: Rome bleeds. And Boudica watched, not from a distance, from the front lines. On her chariot, with her daughters, she was not a general, she was a force of nature. Verulamium, another Romanized town, another symbol of conquest, met the same fate: fire, steel, silence. For a moment it seemed the empire might collapse. Nero in Rome reportedly considered withdrawing from Britannia entirely. Imagine that, the greatest power on earth, shaken by a queen with a chariot and a cause. But empires do not fall easily. Suetonius regrouped. He chose his battlefield with precision, a narrow defile flanked by forest with open ground in front, perfect for Roman discipline, deadly for a chaotic horde. His army, 10,000 legionaries, hardened, armored, trained. Hers, 80,000 or more, inspired, furious, but carrying families and wagons, a fatal mistake. The Britons charged, a tidal wave of rage. The Romans held. They used the testudo formation, shields locked, spears forward. Then the gladius, short, brutal, efficient. They cut into the mass like scythes through wheat. And when the Britons tried to retreat, the wagons blocked their path. It became a slaughter. Tens of thousands died. The rebellion shattered, and Boudica, she vanished. No Roman triumph paraded her in chains, no execution, no burial record. Some say she drank poison, others that she died of illness, hidden in the woods. But her body was never found, and in that absence something extraordinary happened. She became immortal. The Romans feared her in life. In death, they could not silence her. Tacitus, a Roman senator, wrote of her not as a monster, but as a noble leader wronged by cruelty. Cassius Dio described her presence as terrifying, her voice like a war trumpet. She was erased from official records, but not from memory. Centuries later in Victorian England, she rose again, in statues and poems and speeches, a symbol of resistance, of female power, of national pride. Today, near Westminster Bridge, a bronze Boudica stands on her chariot, hair wild, eyes forward, wheels poised to crush the past. Tourists pass, traffic hums, but the wind still carries her name. Because Boudica was never just a queen, she was a question. What happens when the oppressed rise? She was not perfect. Her vengeance was brutal. Thousands died by her command. But history is not made by saints. It is made by those who dare to say, enough. She united tribes that had once warred. She made Rome fear. And though she lost the battle, she won the war of memory. Because empires may build monuments, but legends are born in fire, and hers still burns. Ancient medicine, the first healers, long before hospitals, before MRIs, before the word medicine even existed, there was healing, not as a science, not as a profession, but as a whisper, a ritual, a bond between the sick and the unseen. In the ancient world, illness was never just a fever, a wound, or a failing organ. It was a message, a crack in the harmony between body, soul, and the cosmos. And to heal was not to fix a part, but to restore the whole. So tonight, let's journey back to the first healers, not in white coats, but in robes, feathers, or silence. To the minds that saw sickness not as a malfunction, but as a call to remember, because what they knew long before we did was this: you cannot heal the body without listening to the spirit. In Mesopotamia, where the first cities rose from the dust, disease was not random. It was divine, a punishment from the gods, a curse from a wronged ancestor, or worse, the work of a demon slipping through a broken taboo. To cure a patient, you didn't just treat symptoms. You asked, who have you offended? What ritual was forgotten? Healers were not doctors. They were exorcists, priests, diviners. They consulted clay tablets inscribed with incantations, burned herbs to purify the air, and buried figurines under the house to trap evil spirits. One text commands, "If a man is possessed by a ghost, recite this charm while placing a stone on his head." It sounds strange, but to them it made perfect sense. The body was a vessel, and if the spirit was wounded, the flesh would follow. Then came Egypt, where healing was both sacred and startlingly advanced. The SW&W, as Egyptian physicians were called, walked between worlds. They were scholars, surgeons, and servants of the gods. We know their methods from the Ebers Papyrus, a scroll over 3,500 years old, filled with 700 remedies, and for asthma, tumors, even depression. They used honey as an antiseptic. Centuries before germ theory, they prescribed garlic for heart health, now proven to lower cholesterol. They packed wounds with moldy bread, a primitive form of penicillin. And they performed surgery, setting bones, draining abscesses, stitching cuts with linen thread. But no treatment began without a prayer. The god Thoth gave them knowledge. Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of plague, could heal or destroy, so every incision, every poultice was made with a chant. To the Egyptians, a fever wasn't just heat in the blood, it was a spiritual imbalance. And healing meant restoring Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. So yes, they had scalpels, but they also had spells, and they believed both were necessary. Now cross the sea to India, where healing was never just medicine, it was a way of life. This was Ayurveda, the science of life, a system born from the Vedas, older than recorded history. At its heart, 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, energies made from the 5 elements. When they were in balance, you were healthy. When they clashed, you fell ill. An Ayurvedic healer didn't just ask, where does it hurt? They asked, when do you sleep? What makes you angry? How does the wind feel on your skin? Prevention was the highest art. Diet, meditation, yoga, breath work, all part of the cure. And then there was Sushruta, a man who lived 2,600 years ago and who wrote the Sushruta Samhita, a surgical Bible. He described over 300 procedures. He used 120 instruments, scalpels, forceps, probes, many made of iron. He taught students to practice stitching on gourds and leather. And yes, he performed rhinoplasty, not for beauty, for dignity. When warriors had their noses cut off in battle, Sushruta rebuilt them, using skin from the cheek or forehead. This was plastic surgery, 1,500 years before the West even considered it. And his first rule? The physician must purify himself before surgery, in body and in mind, because to him healing wasn't just skill, it was sacred. In ancient China, the body was not a machine, it was a landscape, and the key to health was the flow of qi, vital energy, through invisible rivers called meridians. Block the flow, illness. Restore it, healing. This was the foundation of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, a system so refined it still thrives today. The Huangdi Neijing, compiled over 2 millennia ago, laid out the laws of balance, yin and yang, the 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, water. Each organ, each emotion belonged to one. Anger, too much fire in the liver. Grief, metal imbalance in the lungs. Diagnosis was an art of observation, the color of the tongue, the rhythm of the pulse, felt in 6 positions on each wrist, the tone of the voice, even the patient's dreams. Then came the tools, acupuncture, needles placed with precision to unblock qi, moxibustion, burning mugwort to warm the meridians, cupping, glass or bamboo cups creating suction on the skin, herbal formulas, complex blends tailored to the individual. To the Chinese, you couldn't separate the person from the season, the weather, or the soul. Healing meant aligning with nature, not fighting it. Now to Greece, where medicine began to step away from the temple, but not too far. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, rejected the idea that illness was purely divine punishment, but he didn't throw out the gods. Instead, he proposed a new balance, the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Too much black bile, melancholy. Too much blood, fever and excitement. Treatment, bloodletting, purging, diet, baths, to restore equilibrium. But Hippocrates also gave us something deeper: observation. He told doctors, walk slowly, speak gently, study the patient, not just the disease. He noticed how seasons, water quality, and emotions affected health. And he gave us the Hippocratic Oath, still recited today, with its sacred vow, first, do no harm. Meanwhile, in Rome, Galen, a Greek physician serving emperors, dissected animals to understand anatomy. He treated gladiators, studied the nervous system, and systematized medicine across the empire. But even Galen believed in the soul's role in health, and across Greece, Asclepia healing temples offered something modern hospitals lack: dreams. The sick would sleep in a sacred hall, hoping the god Asclepius would appear in a vision, telling them how to heal. Priests interpreted the dreams. Then came baths, exercise, diet, all guided by divine insight. To them, the unconscious mind was not random. It was a bridge to healing. Now let's go to the Americas, where healing was never separate from the earth. Among Native American tribes, the healer and the medicine man or woman was a bridge between worlds. Illness could mean a broken taboo, a lost soul, or disharmony with nature. So treatment wasn't just herbs, it was ceremony, sweat lodges to purify body and spirit, vision quests to find purpose, drumming circles to call back the soul, smudging and burning sage, cedar, or sweetgrass to cleanse energy. Plants were teachers. The healer didn't just use them, they asked permission. In the Amazon, shamans drink ayahuasca, not to escape, but to see. They believe the plants speak in visions, revealing the root of suffering. In Aboriginal Australia, healing flows through the dream time, the ancestral time that still lives in the land. Healers follow songlines, paths across the earth that carry stories, power, and medicine. To them, the land is alive, and to be sick is to be out of tune with it. And now, the most surprising truth of all: ancient surgery was real and often successful. In Peru 2,000 years ago, surgeons performed trepanation, cutting holes in the skull to relieve pressure or treat head injuries. Archaeologists have found hundreds of skulls, many with clear signs of healing. Some show bone regrowth, meaning the patient survived. Success rates? In some regions over 80%. They likely use coca leaves for pain, alcohol from maize as a sedative, and herbal antiseptics. In India, Sushruta described cataract surgery using a needle to push the clouded lens aside. He detailed C-sections, hernia repairs, even urinary tract reconstruction. And in Egypt, tools for amputation, wound stitching, and cauterization have been found in tombs. Sharp, precise, sterilized by fire. These weren't butchers, they were pioneers, working without anesthesia, guided by observation and necessity and courage. So what do we take from all this? That ancient medicine wasn't primitive. It was different. It didn't separate body from mind. It didn't see illness as an enemy to destroy, but as a signal to understand. And today, as we study the placebo effect, the gut-brain axis, the impact of stress on immunity, we're rediscovering what they knew. Emotions affect health. Environment matters. Belief can heal. Prevention is better than cure. Modern medicine has scanners, drugs, and robots, but it's turning back to holistic care, integrative medicine, mind-body practices, yoga, meditation, forest bathing, herbal remedies. Even hospitals now offer smudging, acupuncture, and dream journals, and medical students still swear a version of the Hippocratic Oath because the old ways never truly died. They waited, and now in a world of burnout, anxiety, and disconnection, they whisper, "You are not a machine, you are a living system." And healing begins when you remember that. So the next time you feel unwell, don't just ask, "What's wrong with me?" Ask, "What is my body trying to tell me?" Because the first healers didn't just treat symptoms, they listened. And sometimes that's the deepest medicine of all. Sappho, the voice that outlived silence. There are voices that echo through time not because they were loud, but because they were true. This is the story of one such voice, a woman who didn't conquer empires, didn't command armies, didn't leave behind statues or laws. She left behind love. Her name was Sappho, and she sang. Born on the island of Lesbos around 630 BCE, in a world where most women's lives were measured in silence, she chose sound, not as rebellion, but as necessity, as breath, as truth. We know almost nothing of her face, her hands, her final breath. No portraits, no diaries, only fragments, like shards of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a different truth. But from those fragments a woman emerges, not a myth, not a symbol, but a poet who wrote from the heart in the first person about love. And not just any love, about love between women. And that, in the ancient world, was revolutionary. To understand Sappho, you must first understand Lesbos. Not just a dot on a map, but a world of its own. Lush, coastal, alive with the scent of olives, salt, and wild thyme. A place where music wasn't entertainment, it was worship. Here, poetry wasn't read. It was sung, accompanied by the lyre, a small harp cradled in the arms, its strings plucked like a heartbeat. And in this world, Sappho didn't just live, she shaped it. She likely led a thiasos, a circle of young women, aristocratic, educated, devoted to the arts. Not a school, not a cult, but a sacred sisterhood. A space where song, dance, and emotion were not just allowed, but honored. Here, bonds formed that were deep, intimate, and possibly romantic. And Sappho wrote about them not as metaphors, but as real women. Gongula, Andromeda, Atthis. She named them. She praised their beauty. She mourned their departures. She confessed her longing. In one fragment she writes, "I have not had one word from her. I beg you, bring her back to me." This isn't epic poetry. This isn't about gods or war. This is a text message from 2,600 years ago, raw, aching, human, and it changed everything because before Sappho, most poetry was third person, about heroes, battles, fate. She turned inward. She said, "I feel, I love, I hurt." And in doing so, she invented lyric poetry. The word lyrical comes from lyre. From her, she didn't just write poems, she composed songs for the soul. Her verses were short, vivid, rhythmic, designed to be performed, not read, often in private under starlight surrounded by women. She used a dialect called Aeolic Greek, softer, more musical than the formal Attic of Athens, and her meter in the Sapphic stanza became legendary. 3 long lines building tension, then a short, sharp fourth, like a sigh, a gasp, a heartbeat skipping. It was subtle, it was sensual, it was the sound of longing made into music. And her instrument, the lyre, not loud, not grand, just enough to carry her voice, clear, intimate like a whisper in the dark. Imagine it, the soft pluck of strings, the rise of her voice, women gathered close, hanging on every word. She didn't sing about conquest. She sang about a glance, a blush, a hand trembling. She wrote, "He seems to me equal to the gods, that man who sits opposite you and hears your sweet voice. But here's the twist. She's not the woman being admired. She's the observer, the one watching the woman she loves, speaking to another man. Her heart pounds. Her voice fails. Jealousy, desire, beauty, all in a few lines. This is not poetry. This is emotion recorded in real time. And it still stings. But then silence. So much of her work is gone, not just lost, erased. We have less than 10% of what she wrote. 9 books once existed. Now only fragments remain, quoted by ancient grammarians, scribbled on papyrus, buried in Egyptian trash heaps. Why? Because her poetry was too honest. She wrote about female desire. She celebrated love between women. And in later centuries, especially under Roman, Christian, and Victorian morality, that was dangerous. The Library of Alexandria, where her works were preserved, burned. Monasteries where texts were copied chose not to recopy her. Church leaders, uncomfortable with her sensuality, let her fade. Some believe her scrolls were intentionally destroyed, not in war, but in silence. By the Middle Ages, she was a ghost. Her name survived, but her voice buried, and when people remembered her, they rewrote her. They invented a myth that she was heartbroken over a man, Phaon, a ferryman, that she leapt from the cliffs of Leucas in despair. But there is no evidence for this story. It doesn't appear in her poetry. It doesn't appear in early sources. It was created centuries later to make her pain acceptable, to turn a woman who loved women into a tragic romantic for a man, to erase her queerness, and it almost worked. Yet she survived, not in monuments, not in complete works, but in fragments. In 1897, archaeologists in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, dug through ancient rubbish and found papyrus scraps, among them lines of Sappho, unseen for 1,100 years. In 2004, a nearly complete poem was discovered, wrapped around a mummy in Germany. Each discovery felt like a resurrection, and with each word, she spoke again. Because here's the miracle, even in pieces, her poetry burns. She wrote about impermanence, how beauty fades, how love slips away, and now her own work reflects that truth. She didn't need to be whole to be powerful. Sometimes a single line is enough. Love shook my soul like the wind on the mountain, trouble in the oak trees, not gentle, not sweet, violent, elemental, true. And at the center of her world stood Aphrodite, not just a goddess, but a companion. In her most famous surviving poem, Sappho doesn't praise Aphrodite. She calls to her, "Come to me now, O golden-throned Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, weaver of wiles, come, if ever before you heard my voice from afar, and leaving your father's golden home, you came." She speaks to the goddess like a friend, like someone who's been there before, like a woman asking for help and love. And Aphrodite answers, not with miracles, but with presence, because to Sappho love wasn't sinful, it was divine. It was worth calling down a goddess. We don't know how Sappho died. Some say peacefully on Lesbos, surrounded by the sea she loved. Others repeat the myth, the leap from the cliff. But the truth, she didn't need a dramatic death. Her poems were her immortality. She didn't vanish. She transformed. Her name lives in our language. Lesbian, from her island. Sapphic, from her name. Words that once meant only geography or poetry now carry the weight of identity, love, resistance. She became a symbol, not because she planned it, but because she was honest. And in every age, someone finds her. In the Renaissance, scholars wept over her fragments. In the 19th century, queer women whispered her name like a secret. Today, poets set her lines to music. Artists paint her under moonlight. Lovers quote her when words fail, because she didn't just write about love, she gave it a voice. And that voice, broken, scattered, silenced, still speaks, not because it was loud, but because it was true. So if you've ever loved someone the world didn't understand, if you've ever felt your heart race at a glance, if you've ever written a poem or sent a message or held your breath hoping they'd reply, then you've heard her, you felt her, and in that moment, she lives.